almost about that time. Right about now.
Right about now. Funk, bunk, 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 soul, brother.
So, Dr. Judy Ho, welcome to the Right About Now podcast.
I'm so excited to be with you, John. Thank you so much for having me.
It is such a pleasure to meet you, and I really enjoyed your book and all your work on behalf of self-sabotage and just mental health in general. You really have great stuff to say, and you say it in a very, very clear, articulate, and easy to understand for us layman way. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
Oh, thank you for the kind feedback. This book was a very exciting endeavor for me just because I see self-sabotage as such a universal thing that happens to everybody. And obviously for some people, it tends to be more of a problem than for others. But I feel like almost everybody, if they really thought back in their history, could probably see at least one or two instances in their life where, oops, I think I might have self-sabotaged something.
Yeah. Well, I'm Mr. Self-Sabotage. So this one really resonated with me. So I'm and I think a lot of my listeners probably go through this too, because I feel like a lot of creative people, most of our listeners are creative professional writers. And I think there's a lot of self-doubt and a lot of things that go into it. So I really want to get into the specifics here. But before we talk about self-sabotage, I'd love to talk about you, a little bit about your background, like how you got into doing what you're doing and what you do now.
Sure. Well, so actually in high school, I started to think that I might want to pursue the field of psychology because I was part of the Big Brother, Big Sister program. It was one of the volunteer programs I was part of. And I just remember that I was only 15 years old. Like, what did I know? And they assigned me this little girl. She was only 10. And I had no professional knowledge, obviously, at 15. I just thought it was a fun way to volunteer and maybe, earn some good credits towards college applications.
Yeah.
But I would never have imagined the kind of impact that experience would have had on me, just showing up every week at the same time, like I said I would for this little child who's 10 and in the foster system. We didn't do anything particularly astounding. I would just take her to get ice cream, or sometimes we'd go watch a movie. But that idea of just consistently being there for somebody really seemed to have a positive impact on her because the adults in her life were like a revolving door because of the foster system. And so I realized that we grew to have this really strong bond, and it was something that helped me to realize that only one person can make such a big difference in another person's life, sometimes without even necessarily knowing how you're making that difference. And that was just so fascinating to me. And it really drove me to pursue the career of psychology as I went through my undergraduate studies at Berkeley, and then received my doctorate at the UC San Diego and San Diego State University joint doctoral program. I was always
sorry
really
that your
focused.
I'm sorry that your team lost last night. I don't know.
I know. It's called selective memory. I just don't think about
You didn't
that.
think about that.
Yeah, so I can have a good day. But
That's
thank
wonderful
you.
about the Big Brother, Big
Yeah.
Sister. I actually did that program myself. I was a Big Brother in high school, yeah, and also later in my adult years, and I did find it to be very valuable. And it's a great program. I mean, I have a little bit of a sad story attached to that, which I will not share. But I feel like I made an impact, and it's one of those things where it makes more of an impact, I think, on you sometimes than on the kid that you're mentoring,
Oh, absolutely. And so I think that was really what brought me into the field of psychology. But then as I continued to study and work in the field, I increasingly specialized. So now I'm a clinical and forensic neuropsychologist. I do some expert witness work where I conduct evaluations to understand somebody's psychological and cognitive functioning. So I do work a lot in the legal space as a psychology expert. But also, I think a big part of my work is always to try to make evidence-based scientific treatments accessible for people and to help reduce the stigma that is still out there about mental illness. We have come a long way, but that stigma is absolutely still there. And people sometimes think that because they struggle with depression or anxiety, that means that it's a character weakness or there's something wrong with them. And I do think that sometimes social media makes you feel like your life is supposed to be positive and shiny all of the time. And it's hard for us to recognize and reconcile that when we're looking at somebody else's social media profile, that is a highlight reel. It's kind of like,
Mhm.
when you think about a trailer for a movie, right? Some of the best moments are in that trailer and it's 2 minutes, but the
Yeah,
movie's 3 hours sometimes.
that's a
And
good point. Yeah.
yeah, so I feel like it's hard though for us to reconcile that though, because you see and are exposed to these messages. And I also think that a lot of times people just don't feel comfortable talking about their personal struggles. And so even the people that you work with or are friends with, they may be going through stuff that you don't know, right? And then you look at their life and you think, well, if my life's supposed to be a different way. And I find that that stigma for mental health concerns still exists, even though after the pandemic, we know that mental health struggles have increased. People are still not talking about it. And when they do, I think they feel embarrassed or shameful about it oftentimes. So a lot of my work is really to normalize
Yeah.
that psychological concerns and having mental health struggles is rather the norm, really, than the exception these days. And really teaching people about how to access scientific care for themselves and to become really educated consumers in how to take care of their mental health.
Yeah. And I love that you're casting a light on self-sabotage specifically in your book and in your work. I think it's not something that a lot of people talk about. They
Yeah.
talk, we do hear a lot about depression. We do hear a lot about anxiety. I've talked about both of those topics on this show. As somebody who has been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, I'm very aware of anxiety. I try to be very public about it. But self-sabotage is something that really intrigued me because it's one of those things. It was kind of a fairly new term to me. Now, I probably shouldn't be because I read a lot of this stuff, and my wife is a therapist, so I should know about these things.
Cool.
But so when I saw your book and I started reading it, I was like, wow, this is so interesting, and so many of us, fall prey to this, with maybe even what I'm so fascinated with is even unconsciously, that we self sabotage, the idea that we don't even realize that we're doing it. So I want first before let's talk about how just to define what self sabotage is, so we have people know where we're coming from. What's your definition of self sabotage?
Yeah. So self sabotage, quite simply put, is just when we get in our own way despite our best intentions.
Hmm.
So this could happen in all kinds of things. It could happen in your romantic relationships, in your family relationships, your friendships, how you approach your career, goal setting, mental health and physical health goals, you name it. So it's just getting in your own way despite your best intentions. And a lot of times these processes are kind of subconscious to people.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So there's the ones that are maybe conscious, or maybe I don't know. It's like more obvious. Like for example, one might say that if you have a drinking problem, that you might be self-sabotaging, your life and your career by drinking. And I guess maybe some people who are alcoholics are not necessarily aware of this, but that seems more obvious to me as a than something like, you always do this weird thing whenever you're around a woman that is self-sabotaging your ability to make real connections, or you think a certain way about your career, and haven't really been able, or act a certain way and haven't really been able to advance your career in the way you'd like to, because unknowingly to you keep doing the same sort of self-sabotaging behavior over and over again. So have I so there seems like, I don't know, there's probably more of a clinical way, the sort of unconscious and conscious, I guess, self-sabotage is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, and you gave some great examples of, potential forms of self-sabotage that people don't necessarily think of right away. I think some other ones that I think are very common are things like procrastination.
Yep.
Procrastination is a form of self-sabotage, and people can't help but do it sometimes. And other times they actually have a interesting belief about procrastination that causes them to do that over and over again. Some people say, well, when I procrastinate, that's when I'm at my best. I have that pressure put on myself, and then I can create better. But of course, at some point you run out of time, so that even if you have the most amazing ideas, you just can't execute them. And so that procrastination also over time does wear on our self-esteem and our belief that we can achieve what we set out to do. I think that sometimes self-sabotage in relationships can look like saying that you don't need connection, saying that you're a loner, saying that you're somebody who's super independent and don't need to be in a relationship, and denying yourself of that human connection all of us need. I mean, it's true that everybody's propensity for what works best for them connection wise is going to be different. There are some people who say, you know what, I just need one or two people in my inner circle and I'm super happy. And then there are some people who say, no, I like kind of having bigger groups of people to interact with different people every week. But either way, human connection is a universal need. We are social beings. And without that, we can't mentally or physically thrive. And so when people say, well, I don't really need that connection, I don't need that, I'm a loner, most of the times they're saying that because they're trying to avoid getting hurt or disappointed in some way. But denying yourself of that universal human need that is just biological and evolutionary in nature is also a form of self-sabotage. There's also people who set the same wellness goals over and over again. You know,
Mm.
New Year's runs around and they say, okay, this is going to be the year where I'm going to exercise 5 days a week, or I'm going to lose that 30 pounds that I've been carrying around. But then as they get closer and closer to their goal, they start inevitably doing things to take themselves further away from it. And sometimes it's inexplicable because they're saying, well, I'm making the progress, so why am I all of a sudden stopping, or why is this happening? But what sometimes people don't realize is that as you get closer to reaching a goal, there is what is called the approach avoidance phenomenon in psychology, which means that once you get closer to reaching the goal, all of a sudden, kind of the downsides of reaching that goal
Mm.
become much more in the forefront of your mind. And so, for example, once you finally reach a goal weight, you have to maintain it. It takes work. It's
Right.
long-term work. It's not something that you can just kind of take for granted. And so it's almost like when you get to that last 5 pounds, a lot of people start to become more concerned with some of those issues that could come up in terms of the long-term management of it. It's not going to be super easy. And some of this is not conscious, right? It could be subconscious, but ultimately what that leads to is some self-sabotaging behavior where, they'll start to have more days where they're saying, I don't care. I'm just going to go ahead and eat 2 or 3 brownies, even though I've promised myself I'd moderate my dessert intake. Um,
That's
and
so
that kind
interesting.
of thing
What
will
is it
start
called?
happening.
The approach. What is it called? Approach.
It's called the approach avoidance phenomenon.
And the approach avoidance phenomenon. Wow, I had never heard of that, and I can see that playing out in so many different ways in my own life and people I know. Like, for example, I know people who, want to fall in love, and they keep this pattern over and over again, where as soon as they get really close to somebody, um,
Yep.
and start falling in love, then they pull away, and they're like, they start freaking out, and that feels to me like a form of self sabotage. Am I right there? Where it's like,
Exactly. And also an idea of the approach avoidance phenomenon. That's a great example of how this happens in relationships. Essentially, this occurs anytime that you're drawn toward a goal or an outcome, but then you experience those conflicting emotions or obstacles that makes you hesitant or resistant to pursuing it all the way.
but
And this
why?
can even
Like, you
happen at
finally,
work.
yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off, but why do we do that? Because again, that's like the sabotage part, where it's like we're finally getting what we want. Like, let's say, this happens a lot with people with success. Just, where they say, I want to be successful, but then as soon as they're about to do something where they're going to become successful, they like blow it up, right? Like,
Yeah.
I see this again and again. I probably do this unconsciously, where it's like maybe I could have made a decision that would have led to me making more money or having some more success in my career, and I didn't do it,
Yeah.
for whatever reason. Why do we do that? Why do we sabotage ourselves that way?
Well, I think that oftentimes, people want to achieve a certain level of success. Let's just talk about in their career.
Mhm.
But then there's also this anxiety or fearfulness about the responsibilities and pressures that might come with that
Mm.
promotion or with that new goal. Or, okay, I'm finally going to start my own business, but oh my gosh, like what if I fail? And so that really leads to that sense of ambivalence or indecision. And I think that there's an actual evolutionary explanation for this in my belief and my research, and that is, your body and your mind, they're always trying to protect you from harm, right? This is a big part of survival. And
Right.
so this
Fight or flight.
idea, right. And this
Right.
idea of like back in the day, what we were most afraid of most of the time was, the saber-toothed tiger, the bear that was going to eat us. Well, nowadays, thankfully for most of us, that is not our immediate fears, but then the immediate fears really become more social and psychological in nature. And the idea of, well, if I reach this goal, but it becomes too difficult for me to handle, how will I take it? What would that do to my self-esteem if I actually had to deal with that failure? And your mind then in its, best efforts to protect you, much like an overprotective parent, essentially tries to stop you from even going to that. particular situation. And so it starts to, blow up your mind with all these fears and all the bad things that can happen, and basically catastrophizing rather than allow you to really enjoy the fruits of that labor if you were to achieve that goal finally, and thinking about the positives, or really leaning into your belief that you can manage whatever comes your way. And so those fears becoming much more prominent in your conscious mind and your subconscious mind is actually a form of your mind trying to protect you, but like kind of going overboard in that protection.
So interesting. So your mind is sort of tricking you into thinking that it's protecting you when it's actually doing the opposite, you know?
Exactly. Yes. It's like well-intentioned, right? Like most overprotective parents.
Yeah.
But then they stop you from experiencing all of the different various opportunities and joys of life that you could. So it's kind of this idea of like living really safe, but not feeling like you've reached your potential.
So you're biologically, like you're sort of biologically given instincts, the reward, or protecting yourself from dangerous things is like the worst helicopter parenting, right? Where it's kind of like you're so the biologically tuned part of you is so scared of failing or whatever it is, that it will actually prevent you from wanting to do that thing. So in a way, you're up against like thousands of years of biology here when you're fighting against self-sabotage.
Exactly. So on the one hand, it kind of sounds like, oh, well, then what skill do I have to overcome it? And that's certainly not the message that I'm trying to give. You do have a lot of skills to be able to overcome this once you recognize that this is a pattern. But I think it does speak to the universality of self-sabotage. So hopefully that helps you to not overly stigmatize yourself for having this struggle. It's like, look, it's like part of your biological imprint that you probably will have this struggle at some point in life, but recognizing the pattern and knowing what to do with it, that's going to make all the difference.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about, you have an acronym that you came up with, LIFE, LIFE, and
Yeah.
it's the different ways that we avoid, reaching our goals. And it really is the different ways that we self-sabotage ourselves. And you even
Yeah.
have a quiz in your book to sort of help you identify which of the L, I, F, or E is most sort of prevalent in your own experience. So can you take us through the L, the I, the F, and the E? Because I think it would help people understand like there are different types of self-sabotage.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of what we were talking about just now, this idea of your mind trying to protect you. Well, when we're in balance with both our pursuit of going to the goals that we want and thinking about, likely obstacles and things that might come up, those things are in balance, but sometimes that balance switches so that self-sabotage switch gets turned on and you become much more inundated in your mind about like the fears and all the negative consequences of achieving your goal, which is what leads to the self-sabotaging behaviors. And for most of us, the switch happens related to one or more of this acronym of life. So life stands for 4 common factors that people flip that self-sabotage switch.
Mhm.
And for some people, they may say, well, one of these factors really explains why I do it. But for other people, it may be a combination of the 4, or maybe even all 4. But the 4 of the acronym stands for the following. So L stands for low or shaky self-esteem. This is your ideas and beliefs about yourself and whether or not you can accomplish what you're set your mind to. People tend to have maybe sometimes different levels of self-esteem with different things.
Mhm.
So some people may say, well, I have great academic self-esteem. I know I'm a good student, but I don't have the best sports related or physical fitness related self-esteem. Like I just don't see myself as an athlete, right? I don't have great self-esteem with romantic relationships, but I have great self-esteem when it comes to reaching my goals in terms of my mental health, right? So
Right.
people can have different levels of self-esteem in different domains of life, but wherever you might have a more low or shaky self-esteem, that's where you might see self-sabotage occurring most in your life.
Right.
I stands for
Okay.
internal. Oh, so go ahead.
Okay. So self-esteem. So it doesn't it it's not an equal proof. Like it can be, and how can I phrase this? So self-esteem, you can have self-esteem in one area and not in another area. It's not like if you have low self-esteem, it cuts across all areas. So it's important for someone to be aware of where they might have low self-esteem. Are you able to judge that by yourself? Like, are you able to adjudicate your own behavior to know where you might have self-esteem, or do you sort of have instincts about that? 'Cause most people might be like, well, I'm pretty, like, I have self-esteem about everything, low self-esteem about everything, but,
Yeah.
or I have high self-esteem about everything if you're Donald Trump. But how do you, sorry, didn't mean to throw him in there, but you know what I mean? But you know what I mean? Like, certain people are blowhards and certain people have a lot of insecurities. How do you know which of your, where you might need to work on your self-esteem?
Yeah, I think, other than seeing where your self-sabotage tends to occur, like is it in the romantic relationship space or career space or physical fitness and health space, it's also about the beliefs that tend to be in your mind when you think about setting goals in a specific area. And so if we're being honest with ourselves and we're actually tapping into our thought process, you might discover that there are certain parts of your life where self-esteem types of questions come up more for you as you're kind of visiting or thinking about the goals that you might want to reach in a specific area of life. And you're thinking, well, I can't really do that. I might as well just not even set that goal. Like there may be some of these types of self-defeating thoughts or you writing things off because of a lower self-esteem. And
Okay.
you may not connect that right away, but anytime where you feel like, well, no, like that doesn't make sense for me. Or sometimes when people just kind of be very dismissive about certain things, that is another clue that perhaps that area of life you have a little lower self-esteem
Okay.
about.
Let's go into the I. What does I stand for?
So I stands for internalized belief. So we all come into this world pretty much as a blank slate. And then based on our early childhood experiences, we learn more about, who we are, uh, what people are likely to do when they encounter us and how they're likely to respond to us. And just generally how you think the world is going to work out for you. And in this very early few years of life, the primary adults that you interact with, we're learning so much from that time. And it's a type of imprinting that happens. The things that we learn sometimes in the first early years of life stay with us a lot longer, even if things change as we get older, because it's when we're forming our ideas about how the world works and who we are. And so an example would be if you had parents who were very cautious, maybe had some anxiety themselves and were kind of fearful. You watch that and maybe as a child you were kind of annoyed by it because they're always being overprotective and you're saying, oh my God, get away from me. Like, I just want to go and hang out with my friends. Why can't I do what I want? But interestingly, as we get older, we start to sometimes internalize these beliefs for ourselves. All of a sudden, you find that as you're getting older, you're doing some of the same things that your parents did. And
Mm.
you have some of those same fears that are holding you back, those apprehensions. And so, this is how internalized beliefs sometimes can also lead to the phenomenon of self sabotage.
And I would imagine that the internalized beliefs are related to the self-doubt as well, right? You internalize some belief that's low self-esteem, something like, I can't do this. I'm not the kind of person that can do this. I'm just not built to do this. Like, I remember early on in my career, I was like, well, I'm not, somebody told me you're not, I want to be an actor, like really early in my career. Right. And somebody who I trusted said, well, you don't have what it takes to be an actor. You can't really take rejection. And that's so stuck with me that I didn't pursue that career. And, I mean, probably good. Ultimately, I don't know. Maybe, who knows? It's just, it always has stuck with me that was the reason I didn't do it, because somebody had told me something that I had so internalized in my own
Yeah.
consciousness that I
Thanks for
ran.
sharing that. Yeah, because I think that your experience is not at all uncommon. I'm
Mhm.
thinking about a friend I had in college who, we went through all of our college courses together in psychology. Like he wanted to be a psychologist. That was the thing that he wanted the most. And I remember one of the mentors that we both had, because we both were working in this research lab, for some reason, just totally dissuaded him from pursuing psychology, basically made it
Mhm.
seem like he wasn't going to be successful and why should you do it? And, he ended up just dropping that goal completely. And he has a good career now as a lawyer, but he
Right.
completely pivoted. And I do wonder sometimes, wow, if it wasn't for what that
Yeah.
person said,
I mean,
like,
maybe that person was
yeah,
trying to protect me in some way, but
right.
I've never forgotten that happened. And I'm sort of mad at myself for not even, for letting somebody influence my, and this person was a very charismatic figure in my life. It was actually my parents' guru. So it was like, this
Oof.
wasn't just like any this was like a person that was held in high regard, so it just has bothered me. Let's get to the F. For those keeping score, we're at L. We've done L and I. We're now at the F. Yeah.
Okay. So F is fear of the unknown or fear of change. Now, all human beings have a little bit of fear of the unknown and fear of change because, again, that is biologically adaptive. Like, you need to feel comfortable in your daily surroundings to know that there is some pattern that you can expect so that we can continue to live and to thrive. But personality wise, there are some people who are a little bit better with change and with the unknown than some others. And so if you're somebody who generally doesn't like a lot of change, or when there's too many unknowns, you're like, forget it, I'd rather not do it, that can end up leading to self-sabotage as well. And again, some of this could be related to some internalized beliefs, but I think that there's a little bit of a temperament there. So when I observe really, really young children, like babies, infants, toddlers, I notice that even without environment being a big piece of the puzzle yet, that there are some temperament differences, you know, where some babies just are more exploratory than other babies. And so I think that sometimes those personality traits, if there are some that kind of tend to, for you, like you just feel more comfortable being in the familiar more, that can actually lead to some self-sabotage because some of achievement in life is about change, is about putting yourself out there when you don't know exactly what's going to happen.
Right. So F to me, that very much resonates with people like me who have anxiety. And one of the things that people who have anxiety fear is the unknown, and they don't like the ambiguity of life, right? And so therefore they might not choose something that will take them further into the unknown. They'd rather, do things that they, at least, even though it's all an illusion anyway, because we have no idea what anything is going to turn out to be or become. But in our sort of need to control the future, I think we kind of make decisions that we feel are safer than others. Lastly, let's end with E. We're at the end of life now.
That's right. End of life.
Or the beginning of life.
End of life.
Or the beginning of life.
So we're at E, and E is excessive need for control. So this is for all of my high achievers out there, people who I lovingly call type A individuals because I see myself as a type A individual.
Right.
But like I think people who resonate with this, or maybe they describe themselves as perfectionists, a lot of what makes them feel good is being able to control as many factors as possible in their life. But again, to go out of the box a little bit and to be able to achieve your goals, you can't control everything. So one good example would be romantic relationships. No matter how much you try, you can't really control how someone's going to respond to you, like how much they're going to love you, how happy your relationship is going to be, what they say or do on a given day in their relationship with you. And so sometimes I find people who are really high achievers and really successful in so many realms of life, but then when it comes to romantic relationships, they have a really hard time letting go and being vulnerable and allowing themselves to experience a relationship in a deeper way, because that would actually involve them having to give up some control, and it's difficult for them.
Yeah, it takes two to tango, or three in modern relationships.
That's right, or four or five. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, open polygamy, polyamorous relationships. Exactly. Yeah, that one resonates not so much with me, but I think my wife, who's probably listening to this, that would resonate more with her, because she wants to. She's very much focused on controlling. That's the way she seems to manage anxiety, and she's talked about this with me. So I don't have to. I'm not throwing her under the bus right here. I love you, honey. So okay, now that we know life, and now that we can identify some of the sources of our self-sabotage, what do we do about it? Like we talked about in the beginning of this interview, some of this is sort of baked into us biologically, right? And some of it is years of thinking a certain way about ourselves. And so, like anything, these are habits in a way that we have created to protect ourselves from failing, to protect ourselves from feeling bad, to protect ourselves. And of course, like you're saying, a lot of times we're actually doing the opposite. We're putting ourselves in more jeopardy. So what do we do to overcome these cycles of thought of self-sabotage and kind of move on? I mean, I think it seems to me the first step is to just identify that you are self-sabotaging and where you're self-sabotaging, right? Which is what I kind of wanted to do in the beginning of this interview. But now what do we do?
Yeah. So, really the next thing to do is to observe and to modify your thinking. So
Mm.
everything really starts with our thoughts. It's so interesting as human beings, language has allowed us to achieve so much, right? Be at the top of the food chain, et cetera. But interestingly, language also traps us a lot.
Mhm.
It's kind of a double-edged sword in a way because language is what makes it hard for us to live in the moment. This idea of mindfulness is so difficult for human beings because with just one brief flash of a thought, you could all of a sudden be reliving a mistake of the past or totally be in some kind of unknown future that may not even happen, but is a big catastrophe,
Yeah.
right? And when things happen to us, when we find ourselves in certain situations, the situations don't really necessarily have to have an impact on us until we give it meaning, right? So an example of this is two people being laid off, right? Obviously, that's generally not a good thing for people to happen to people, but just depending on how you think about it and how you interpret it, it can really change what your day or maybe even the next several weeks or months would look like. So if you have thoughts where you're beating yourself up, like, of course, like, they found me out for the loser that I am, like, now I'm never going to find another job, right? If you have these types of thoughts, it's going to lead to certain kinds of negative feelings
Yep.
and also certain behaviors. Whereas if you have the thoughts of, well, that really sucks, but like, what can I do to try to make the most out of this situation? Like, obviously, this means I'm going to be out of work for a while, but is this a good time for me to like think about what I really want to do in my next job? Or can I take a couple of weeks off and, reconnect with family members and friends that I haven't seen in a while since this is a situation I'm finding myself in anyway? Obviously, if those are the thoughts that are happening, and that's your interpretation, you're going to have a whole different set of emotional reactions and also different actions that relate to it. And so really everything starts with your thoughts. And so this next step in my program is really about understanding where your thoughts start to trap you, where are your
Mhm.
thought traps. And there's several different categories of thought traps that we can find ourselves in. And so essentially what I ask people to do is when they find themselves struggling with a particularly difficult emotion, or if they do something where you're like, oh man, like I wish I didn't do that, or like that's self-sabotage. Do this very simple trick, which is to just rewind briefly, like rewind the tape of your life in your mind and say, what was I thinking just before I noticed this difficult feeling or this action I wish I didn't do?
Mhm.
And usually when you can do that, ask yourself, what was I thinking just before this? You start to identify certain patterns of thinking that happen when you're under stress. And some of those relate to categories of thoughts like catastrophizing, like,
Mhm.
one bad thing happening and thinking, oh my gosh, like my life is ruined. Like I'm never going to recover from this. That could be one category. Another category could be thoughts that relate to what I call shoulds, which is making up all these rules for yourself that are generally unattainable, and the bar keeps moving, right? So it's like, oh, I should have gotten more done today, I should be a better father, I should be a better partner, but
Mhm.
it's all kind of vague. It's like, well, what does it mean to be a better partner? What does it mean that you should have gotten more done today? What does that exactly mean? It's not so much about the specific goal markers, but just about this like constant idea that you're not doing enough.
Yeah.
So that could be one thing. The other type of thought category is one where you compare yourself constantly with other people.
Mm.
So yeah, you reached a goal, but well, what about compared to this person? Like, no, like I'm still not good enough, right? And you're always constantly seeing where you fall short, as opposed to seeing, well, actually, compared to this person, we're pretty much on par. Like, those are not the kind of thoughts you have. You more think about how you don't measure up to somebody. Also, discounting positive things. Sometimes we find in our thought process that uh, positive things are happening, but you keep focusing on the negative. Like, you get your
Mm.
job performance review, 5 awesome comments, 1 comment where it's like, hey, this needs improvement, and all you're focusing on is that 1 comment, and you're just
Right.
completely disregarding the positive comments. Like, well, any monkey could do that. Like,
Yeah.
but here's the thing I really need to focus on, and you beat yourself up
It's
all
like
the
the
time.
comedians who stand up on stage and find the one person in the audience that isn't laughing at their jokes, and that's the person they're the most focused on, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So, evaluating your thoughts in this way really helps you to understand, which patterns you're most susceptible to. And then from there, you can actually do things to try to change your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Having a conversation with my son who's 16 yesterday, and he said, "Dad, Sometimes I realize like when things are going really well in my life, I start worrying that there must be something that should go bad. Like I start feeling like, well, what's going bad? Like I feel like that's a self-sabotage now that I'm seeing that he does, where it's like, and I think we all do this, where it's like, wow, my life is going so well right now. What's going, like, there must be something wrong. Like it's almost like we can't be happy with just being happy. What is that all about?
Yeah, it's really interesting, but I think that sometimes when people find that, a couple of reasons. One is if you grew up around a lot of chaos, a lot of unpredictability, then that becomes your normal.
Mhm.
And so when things are kind of really going well and stable and steady, you're like, no, this means something is wrong. It's that
Yeah.
whole idea of the devil, you know. And
Yeah.
it's not even something that you're always consciously aware of, but it's like, wait, this is not what I'm used to. So that must mean something is bad. I must find something that's wrong. And then, of course, inevitably, they end up creating chaos in their life, right? And then they use that to then go back on their first idea and say, "Ha, I knew it. See, like I knew something was wrong." And then that actually reinforces that original negative belief. So that's one of the ways that it can happen. But another way that it can happen is just people who are kind of like on higher alert all the time. And this kind of goes back again to maybe families where you saw the adults kind of always a bit fearful, always a bit anxious. And you're always feeling like you have to put out a certain fire. And so then when there isn't a fire, you're like, wait, that's not normal. That's not what I expect out of life, right? And then it's hard for you to settle in and really enjoy that time.
Seems to me we're really good at figuring out and creative at figuring out ways not to do things that we know we should do. Like we're super talented at sabotage, really. Like if we could
Yeah.
only turn that skill of self-sabotage into fulfillment or whatever it is, the opposite of self-sabotage. I mean, is that part of it? Is like changing the behavior? Like, because it's like we're so
Yeah.
our default seems to be to go to the place that we're talking about here. Like the default mechanism is to sometimes screw ourselves up.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it's really because the fear oftentimes of change
Mm,
and of progress, uh, it can be so startling, especially if you don't have a model for it. So I feel like, especially with people who are like breaking into like a new career,
right.
the first of your generation to go to college. I mean, it's just like no one that you know has done this. And it's a little scary for all human beings to kind of venture out when it feels like you're on your own. Because actually being in groups is what helps us to survive and thrive,
Yeah.
So like if you feel like you're breaking into some new territory that you don't really have a good model for, or nobody's told you that it was possible, I think that self-sabotage is even more likely to happen. So people who are entrepreneurs, I feel like it's a very common thing.
Yeah. How do
Because
you get
they're
over that
doing,
fear?
yeah,
I mean, of course, entrepreneurs the most unpredictable um, uh,
yeah,
thing. It's completely like when you take it. I've had both, right? So I've had full-time jobs and I've been an entrepreneur. And I can tell you something. I mean, there's trade-offs for each, but being an entrepreneur, man, you just don't know. And most of the time you fail. And I mean, right now I'm going through some really tough times with like losing clients and stuff. I know it'll turn around, but it's like, whoa, being an entrepreneur, there's a lot of unknown, a lot of what you're giving up for security is quite a bit. So how do you get over that fear? And also a lot of people listening to this might be considering becoming entrepreneurs, but are
right.
scared to take that plunge.
Yes.
Yeah.
That I feel like is the most common experience. I,
Yeah.
I, I can't tell you how many times, John, that I talk to people and they tell me about their amazing dreams and like, I think they're such great ideas and like, but I can't do it. Like they immediately then shut it down. Like they have this
Reality. Yeah.
fun,
Money.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like they have this fun time talking about it. You can see how excited they are about it. And they're like, yeah, but that's not for me. And so your question's a really good one. And I
Yeah. What
would
do
say,
you tell them? Yeah.
yeah, so I really talk about values-based living. We sometimes set these goals for ourselves, and sometimes these goals they feel kind of empty even when we reach them. And people are like, "Well, why is that? How come I kind of get kind of down after I reach a goal?" It's like almost like, "Well, what's next now?" It's like, "Well, have you checked that the goals are actually tied to your top values?" And so values are different from goals because you can't check them off, right? Values, um, simply defined, is just the ideas and the philosophies and the ways that you want to live your life to make them meaningful, and how you want to be talked about when you're not in the room, maybe, how you like to be remembered after our short time here on earth. What would you like people to say about you? How would you like them to describe you? And a lot of times people's values are things that, again, are very personal to themselves. And even the definition of their value could vary from one person to the next. So somebody could have a value of adventure, for example, but somebody's form of adventure is, you know, deep sea diving and skydiving. But another person's sense of adventure is really about like, as long as I'm outdoors every day, like that makes me feel adventurous, right? But either way, it's these things that you can't check off the list because you don't just decide one day, oh, I've had enough integrity. Like I don't need integrity anymore, right? It's not like a marathon that you can just check off. I did the marathon. So the most important thing is that people really get what their top values, understand what they are, and then make sure that whatever goals they're pursuing really is connected to those values. Because when the going gets tough, if you can remind yourself, like, why is this important? You're more likely to persevere and then get past those
Mm.
fears and say, it is important for me to keep pushing. And when we think about the most important goals in our lives, and the things that we're oftentimes the most proud of achieving, they don't come as a smooth path, right? I mean, think about getting married, moving across the country for a job, having children, raising children. I mean, if all those moments were positive, that would be quite astounding to me. I don't think anybody would say that.
Yeah.
They all come with ups and downs, but you decide to pursue them anyway because they are of great meaning to you, right? And so it's this idea of joy coming from a different place, of pursuing something that matters, so that even if you do struggle with negative experiences, emotions along the way, it's worth it, right? And I think that that's what I try to tell people when they start to feel like the fear is overtaking them, is like, well, if you can just do away with this idea that something worth pursuing is supposed to feel good all the time, then like that can help you a little bit with that. And just knowing and expecting that something worth pursuing is going to come with complex emotions, right? So I don't know, John, if you watched Inside Out. It's one of my favorite movies
Yeah. I love it.
about like illustrating the complexities of human emotion and what to embrace, right? So it's not about being happy all the time.
Yeah.
And of course, social media, again, tells you that's what you're supposed to feel, but it's not realistic. The negative emotions serve a really important function. It tells you something important about yourself in that situation, and it's adaptive and it's evolutionary there to actually help you, right?
Mm.
So if we can start embracing all the different kinds of emotions that we're apt to feel, then you're going to have a lesser time and struggle with yourself when you do encounter difficult parts of your journey.
Yeah. Inside Out, man, that made me cry. I cried like
Me too.
when
Me
the little
too.
his little memory fades, his little stuffy bear or whatever it was.
Oh yeah. And I
So
really
sad.
embrace a good cry. Like I really embrace a good cry sometimes, especially to art. I feel like it's so such a catharsis. Like I love crying at like movies. I love crying at plays. Like this is
Yeah,
a
I
great
feel like
time
women are
to
better at this. Men are so scared of crying.
yeah.
I had a good cry recently and I didn't even know why. I was on a walk and I started thinking about something and it made me cry. And I was like, God, I haven't cried in like a year. It was a weird feeling, but it did feel good afterwards. And I was kind of happy that I just got it out of my system. You know,
Yeah.
I think I was
Yeah.
just so stressed out and everything just kind of came out. All right. So did we hit all the major points here? Is there anything else we need to talk about how to overcome self-sabotages? So you also talk about alternate strategies to fear and to self-sabotage. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of times we think that, okay, this is just, there's only one way this is all supposed to go. And again, we get settled into our patterns and what's happened in the past. But one way to break those patterns and to make sure that you achieve your goals that are set in your values is to do a series of exercises that I call, well, this is not just my term for it, it's an actual scientific term, and it's kind of a long term, but it's called mental contrasting and implementation intentions. Now, it's a big mouthful. In short, it's called MCII, but the idea is that you're combining a very specific kind of visualization with an action plan.
Mhm.
So the visualization is not all about positive visualization. I mean, that is more enjoyable, obviously, but you have to also visualize the possible pitfalls or the kind of barriers that you might come across. Because if you don't take time to visualize that, then when those things happen, you get disappointed. You don't know what to do. You beat yourself up, but almost everything is going to have barriers. So it's this visualization where you actually spend some time visualizing what your life would look like if your goal was to come true and if you were able to achieve it, and really being as specific with that as possible. But then for the second half of that visualization, it's thinking about, well, what are the potential pitfalls or barriers that could come up that could prevent me or slow me down from reaching those goals, and then identifying what those are. Once you identify those barriers, it's really helpful because then you can create essentially a plan of attack ahead of time. So these are the if then statements of this particular program. So if this barrier happens, then I will do this. And you write this out ahead of time so that then when you encounter that barrier, you already have a plan of attack. You're not struggling with it in the moment when you're already emotionally dysregulated and trying to think on the fly about how you're going to manage that. And
Right.
so it's actually a very simple thing to do, but once people start doing it, it's really powerful because it makes them feel so much more in control. And also knowing that there's going to be certain barriers that come up, that expectation is already there. So you're not going to beat yourself
Don't
up.
be surprised.
Yeah, you won't be surprised. Yeah,
But I
exactly.
like that because also I think, when you're weighing to do something new, no matter what it is, yeah, you always imagine the positive. But if you're like me, you tend to also imagine all the bad things that will happen. And the bad things outweigh the good things, and therefore you don't pursue that thing. But if you're able to visualize the bad things, but then you have an action plan about how you're going to get over them and what you're going to do if they happen, then yeah, that seems to be a good way to arm yourself for potential quote unquote failure, right? Because it's not really failure because you have an action plan.
Exactly. And it tends to make people feel a lot more empowered, like just having that knowledge up front.
Well, this is all such great information, Dr. Judy Ho. Thank you so much for joining the show and talking about all this. If people want to find out more about you, what should they do?
So you guys can follow me on Instagram, Twitter. Dr. Judy Ho is my handle, Dr. DRJUDYHO, or you can visit my website, drjudyho.com, for free resources. There's a bunch of free resources related to my book, but also other free resources for mental and physical wellness.
Yeah, and get her book because there's a really great quiz in it too that can sort of help you understand how you might be self-sabotaging in your own life. Thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you, John. It was so awesome chatting with you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Judy. That was awesome.
Oh, that was so much fun. You're such a great interviewer. And
Oh,
thanks so
thanks.
much
You're
for
a really good
supporting my
interview
work.
subject. Are you a forensic psychiatrist or psychologist, or is that? Oh,
Yeah, I
that's
do forensic work as well.
that's
Yeah.
interesting. My wife's cousin Emily Karam does that. She's a forensic psychiatrist. So I don't know. She
Oh,
works in,
neat.
yeah, her name is Emily Karam, Keram, but she works with, like, she's gone down to Guantanamo a bunch of times to like talk to the
Oh, wow. That's
yeah.
crazy.
And
Yeah.
she invented the term a suicide by cop. That's like her thing.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
That's
Oh
such
my
interesting
goodness.
stuff, right?
So
Uh,
interesting.
yeah, what you do. So do you have clients or are you more like an academic? You
Yeah,
have,
I have clients. So I
okay.
see patients. Yeah, actually, this is on my lunch break
Oh, thank you
between
for
my
doing that.
patients.
Thank you for doing that. Okay.
Yeah. So I also do academic work because I'm a faculty at Pepperdine. But I used to work like 90 to 100 hours a week. Crazy, like
Oh,
just so
wow.
much of my life.
You're on faculty in this, like in the therapy. I wonder if my wife studied with you. I'll have to ask her because she went to Pepperdine.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. So I teach in the master's and doctoral program there. And
Oh,
it's
wow.
great.
I'll
It's
ask
an
her.
amazing, yeah, it's an amazing appointment. But
She
I also
loves it.
like I'm writing books, like I do
Yeah,
some
like you're
work.
you're
It's so great.
inspiration to me. You're such an
Oh,
inspiration to me because
oh,
anybody who does a lot like you, I'm always just like, okay, that's people can make it all
thank
happen. You
you.
have kids?
Oh, well, see, I was just gonna get to that. So now that I have a baby,
Oh my
he's
goodness.
actually not a baby now. He's like a year and
Oh,
4 months. But it really changed. Like, I mean, it's like finding like your identity again as like being a new parent and like not wanting to miss any part of my son's development.
yeah.
And then like also still like wanting that part of my identity that's like really career driven, and I still feel like I have so many goals I want to accomplish. Like
Yeah.
it's been very interesting to try to balance both, but like certainly I don't work 90 hours now. Like there's just no time.
There's
Like
just no time.
I
But it
definitely
makes
work
you,
less.
I think it just
Yeah,
makes you more focused in the way you use your time
it
because
does.
you don't waste as much time. Yeah.
It does. Yeah. I mean,
I've
kind
got
of
two
like,
kids. They're older. They're 13 and 17, but
oh my goodness.
I
Well, they're
remember the
almost
early days.
adults.
It's yeah.
That's crazy. That's a
I
whole
know.
crazy other
That's a
part
whole
of
other
life.
thing. You can come back in 17
I
years.
know, right? I feel like we need to talk about like teens and like
Yeah, a
parenting and
whole
like
other thing. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. But anyway, thank
All
you so
right.
much.
Well,
Let me
thank
know if I
you.
can provide you with any other information while you're
I
putting things.
appreciate that. Thanks, Dr. G. Take
Of
care.
course. Have a good day.